Welcome to the Face-to-Face Ministries podcast. I'm Kathy Little.
And I'm Melinda Wilson, and we are talking all things inner healing, true connection with Jesus, and the full benefits package of the cross. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to our podcast, episode 21, and 21 is my favorite number.
Yeah,
Kathy,
why
is 21 my favorite number?
Well, it's because your birthday is on the 21st
of
August.
If anyone wants to send gifts, come on.
Oh, man. Okay, so the past 5 interviews, they all took place in one day, and this was the last one that we did in that day, and we were pretty tired, especially so Melinda.
And I had talked so much and asked so many questions. I was out of capacity, as they say.
Yes.
In Life Model Works. I had no
capacity.
So I passed it on to the very, very capable Kathy, who at this point had been witness to these incredible conversations. And
your camera operator, which is the typical role, but I got in the hot seat for this one, and I'm really glad that I did. It was a really amazing conversation with Kent and Cathy Larson. They actually are the pastors at a Vineyard Church in Southern California. He was actually recommended to us by Jim Wilder to interview.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, and we weren't really sure what the interview was we weren't sure the take because he's not one of the main life model people, but it was a fantastic conversation because these guys are in a local church with a healing ministry that uses some different models, Immanuel Approach being foundational, and they also use the Immanuel Approach in some broad applications, which you will hear in the interview. So we're going to just let them share and get right into it, and then we'll come back with some closing thoughts. So we are sitting here with Cathy and Kent Larson. Thank you for joining us and being part of our conversation.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
Yeah, we're excited. You are a Vineyard pastor in the Vineyard Church movement. Why don't you just introduce our audience to who you are and what it is that you do? Like, who are you? What is it that you're carrying right now for the body?
Well, yeah, so we've been pastoring for about 19 years in a vineyard in Southern California. And I, from the start of ministering in the vineyard, got exposed to some inner healing stuff, Elijah House kind of training initially, and have done inner healing for many years. And then when we had this ministry, we started healing rooms in the church and stepped into some things that were more and more pastoral care, recovery, counseling kinds of areas, and just have been delighted to see God continue to unfold more and more wisdom in that area. And so we've been delighted in seeing that kind of stuff happen. When you were just explaining what face-to-face is about, I was very excited because one of the things the Lord dropped in my heart right at the beginning of being in the Vineyard movement was the need to have a face-to-face with God. And so as we stepped into inner healing, we started realizing that some of the models were a little more focused on let's fix the pain and not let's not get to Jesus. But then as we found that encounter dynamic of face-to-face, that became more and more precious to us and see more and more results of it. But we have developed what we call now the Immanuel Life Center in our church, where we do sort of an umbrella for all different kinds of inner healing counseling. And we also have a lot of training, seminars and classes and all that in and around it. And also do some stuff regionally and some seminars out of there that are all related to this topic that you guys are all about.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
You want to say anything about?
Well, I think the thing that, because for years I was not involved as a homeschool mom, and in the last probably 8 to 10 years, especially when we came into things Life Model and we got exposed to what Immanuel Prayer was, it became more accessible and doable for me because some of the other inner healing models just felt a little overwhelming and too complex, and I felt like when we first got exposed to Immanuel, I thought, this is something I can do. I resonated with it. Maybe it was just the right timing. I'm not sure what it was. But then we began to explore it ourselves, to do it together, to teach classes on it and seminars. And so we just have grown over the years. And then when the Joyful Journey book came out about Immanuel journaling, we also really latched onto that, so that now I do a monthly Immanuel journaling workshop just to kind of keep it going and keep practicing and keep people, both introducing it to people and people are coming back. I do that, and we both do quite a bit of Immanuel prayer counseling. We just offer it to our church community, but to our wider community as well. So that has become the center. I mean, pastoral care is the big umbrella of what we do, but I would say the Immanuel Approach, Immanuel Prayer Healing has become kind of the center of everything we do, from our classes to seminars to everything. So it's the Lord just keeps emphasizing that this is what you need to focus on.
That's your primary model that you're...
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that what happened is that when I came into the church, there was already 4 inner healing models that were being used in our church. And one lady was traveling all over the world doing seminars in many nations with a certain model. And she's still on our staff, and she's a delightful person, and we've just learned a lot from her. And then we have Elijah House, we have Sozo, we have about 4 other models. And so it's been, actually, when I started taking in some responsibility over this area, it was a little bit overwhelming, actually, because we've got all these different models, and there was a little sense of competition, like we've got the best one over here and we've got the best one over here. So we had to start working with, how do we honor one another? How can we become a community, a healing community, not just a bunch of little healing individual ministries that touch a few people? And so more and more what we've gone after is, how do we lift the healing culture in a church and in a region? And so what we found specifically, initially, was Sozo. Sozo really helped us because the value of Sozo was the removing blockages between us and God. And I felt like that was a very, very intentional. It wasn't just about solving pain, but it was about removing these blockages so we could have a God encounter and God could do more in a person's life at every level. And so that was really a significant addition to at least the mix that I've been exposed to. And then when we heard about this Immanuel approach and some of the wisdom coming out of both the Holy Spirit revelation and the brain science, and understanding, okay, the power of starting in joy, starting in positive places, the power of appreciation, the power of face-to-face interaction, and then letting Jesus lead it, and how simple it was as well, and how safe it was. Mm-hmm. We felt like Immanuel was kind of an entry point to all the other models. So what's happened, to my delight, is almost every other leader of these ministries now are beginning to understand Immanuel as sort of they can even start, like Sozos can start with an Immanuel connection, or an Elijah House can connect them with that kind of connection, and then do this different approaches. So we're beginning to have a unity about that. That's really wonderful. We have a once-a-month team that meets, called the Immanuel Prayer Team, and the leaders of 4 of those models come to that, and they help with that team. But then they have their own, and we refer people to those different groups. So we've really been delighted in how that's played.
That's wonderful that there is a cross-pollination going on, because obviously there's so many different tracks you can pursue, but bringing them all together and realizing that there's value in all of the variety.
That's
because
right. And it's the right thing for
exactly.
For someone, it's a season for this, and then it's time for something else.
Well, we've talked to Donna Da Silva about that. She calls it like a diet. Donna Da Silva, who co-founded Sozo, that there are diets that don't work with some people, and and you need to have the variety. I kind of even see the denominations in the church world. There has to be a place for people to plug in, and not that we're always going to stay where we are, but we keep moving and maturing and growing. But the unity, I mean, John 17, Jesus wanted that from the get-go, that they'd be in unity. But how do we bring unity to the variety of inner healing. And you're talking about the Immanuel Approach, which I'm going to have you just describe that, because it's been described in other podcast episodes, but for the listeners for this particular video, they may not understand that. So describe what it is that the Immanuel Approach is, just very briefly, and then how is that a foundation? How does that help bring unity into the other models that you're dealing with?
You want to explain that?
Well, I'll start, and then you can. Probably the most unique piece of the Immanuel Approach is the value of a connection in a positive memory, whether it's a connection with Jesus, so a time when you felt close to Jesus, or simply an appreciation moment. Or I just recently heard a time where you felt connected. What does that feel like? And a lot of people don't even know. Right. So it could be even as simple as with a pet, or a walk on the beach, or in the forest, or when was a time where you just felt like you were yourself, you felt safe, you felt warm, you felt connected.
Felt in joy or in rest.
Joy
peaceful.
Or in peace. And so we are learning to start at that place and help people really step into that experience again, relive it, feel it. We stir up all those right brain tools to get their relational circuits open, because the key is that when you're in a place of connection, positive connection, healing can happen way better than if you start with the pain.
Right.
So if you hear Jim Wilder or Chris Corsi talk about Immanuel, they talk about you don't want to start down in the thorns.
Right.
You want to start up on a seat of either appreciation or interactive connection with Jesus, and get really connected in what that feels like, and let Jesus decide if he's going to take you and visit the pain. And what we're finding is that sometimes people don't even have to visit the pain. Wow. They have maybe 2 or 3 sessions of just experiencing connection, perceiving Jesus in that connection, and just beginning to grow capacity of a safe connection, a secure attachment with Jesus, because that's kind of the core of when healing begins for people. And so we find that a lot of the time people don't even need to go to pain. Or if they do, Jesus initiates it. It's maybe not even the pain or the presenting issue that they've brought in, because that's often what motivates people to come for prayer or counseling or whatever. And so what we've learned from Carl is you let people talk about their pain just enough to attune to them so they feel heard, seen, heard, and understood, but not to go into this deep spiral so that they're re-traumatized. And then, so we just get an idea of why are you here, but then we begin to talk about, let's find a positive connection, because we find healing happens easier when you start in that positive connection. So at least me, and I think you are too, we're beginning to focus and emphasize even more this connection point and deepening that connection and connecting with Jesus in it and letting him go where he wants to with it. And we love the illustration of Immanuel prayer is really Jesus is in the driver's seat, the receiver is in the passenger seat, and you as a facilitator you're in the back seat. Yeah. And you're coaching and you're blessing and you're paying attention to what's happening, whether it's body language or you're just really in touch. You're connected to Jesus yourself.
Right.
But that unique starting place is in the positive connection.
Well, I'm just going to summarize. Okay, the simplest explanation of Immanuel is 3 things. Number 1 is you look for a positive memory. Number 2, you look for Jesus in the positive memory using gratitude to amplify it. Then you start to dialogue with Jesus about whatever pain you need to process or that he brings up. And because you're in a positive connection with Jesus, you're able to respond and feel his presence in the pain. And for what we've learned is that 80 to 90% of the reason why
people get stuck in
trauma is because they don't have anybody to process it with.
They're alone in it.
They're alone in it. So bringing a positive, powerful Jesus and the facilitator into that painful place is what we're seeing massive healing. Like we've worked with inner healing for many years, but the increase of the the effect of it is quite significant when you start in that positive place. And so we've just been delighted to see what God does.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. And when we were talking before we started recording, the topic of Immanuel journaling and the creative component, could you just address a little bit about the benefit of connecting that within a creative context and how that helps and what that looks like in your context and what you're seeing God do through that creative element? Yeah,
well, we're pretty new at this in one sense in the last couple of years. In another sense, I personally am an artist, and I've been very involved with a creative community. A few years ago, we did The Artist's Way, which is a secular process of unlocking creativity, which is kind of a recovery approach. And I personally got unlocked in some special ways in that process, and realized how many people are really, I think all of humanity is very creative, but a lot of, because of trauma and because of the devaluing of right brain creative relational process in our culture and the history of Western culture, therefore the creative side of our culture has been very suppressed. Mm-hmm. So what we find is the power of using the arts and using various skills, everything from music to painting to every kind of form of art can do different things to help unlock a person's destiny, relational connection, joy. For me, it unlocked a whole hidden part of who I was. Mm. And we were in a group that met for, I don't know, many years, like 10 years probably, of creative people, small group, and we kept discovering more and more and unlocking these people, and it was just in a small group setting, praying, worshiping, a healing kind of dynamic. It wasn't just aimed at healing, but a lot of healing came in the process. So that's one example. Then one of our gals that's doing a lot of inner healing is a very gifted artist as well, and so she started to develop an approach of using this Immanuel process in doing art journaling and Immanuel healing out of that process. So that's another arena that we've been working in. And the third is I've been involved in some online kind of small group house church kind of mentoring, and then we decided to develop this online artist circle dynamic, and we've done 2 groups now, last year and this year. And in that connection, we've done a lot of just emotionally listening to one another, and then listening to God together, and then praying and blessing one another, just in little circles with artists.
Can I just add that these circles are international because they're on Zoom calls.
Oh, that's wonderful.
And it's actually networking people who have art ministries all over the place.
Right.
So
that's brilliant.
Honoring, blessing, nurturing what these people are doing, and it's been so encouraging for the people in these groups.
Yeah, and so what we're discovering, like with any arena, but I think creative people can oftentimes, just like any other topic, they can be focused on their art, and oftentimes can be isolated and not relational.
Right.
And so one of the things we're realizing with creative people is they need to have bonded relationship with God and with each other. And so the more we can nurture that little nucleus of true joy and delight in real relationship unlocks them even more as creatives. Years ago, we did a poetry night at our church, and we had a whole bunch of poets come up and read poetry, and we had a panel. And instead of having a panel that judged them, we had a panel that blessed and prophesied over them.
Oh, that's cool.
And so
that's
each
great.
one would give a poem, and then we bless and prophesy. And I'll never forget the power. There was one guy that barely was writing poetry. His poetry really wasn't very good, but we blessed and prophesied over him. He became an incredibly gifted poet. He's written all these books now of poetry just because he was listened to, delighted in, created joy around him instead of critiqued and judged and misunderstood. So he was unlocked in his personality and his destiny out of that. So we've learned now how to do that in circles, how to do that with listening prayer, some of this Immanuel style listening prayer, has made a big difference, and we're still learning about doing that.
That's so wonderful. It reminds me of some of these tribes in Africa when a young man is caught in a, like he needs to be punished, but they bring him into the center of the tribe and they just speak life into him to call the true self up. Exactly. Remind him who he truly is and connect him with his true self. And how much more powerful to call the gold up in someone and to speak life over them, because then they rise to that.
That's right.
There's something in them that rises to meet what you're seeing that they can't. But they may not know it's there, or they're not aware of it, or they've believed a lie that it's not. But having somebody speak truth into that, what a beautiful example of even how Jesus, he called Peter into his destiny before he knew he was going to deny him in the next minute, So
and then he restored him afterwards.
Exactly.
By calling forth even his weak love.
Yeah.
And said, that's enough.
Yeah.
You're still in.
Yes.
You're not rejected from the tribe.
Right.
Well, and that's, let me just add to the whole, like the Immanuel journaling thing. We're finding that as people find out that Jesus is glad to be with them in their weakness through the Immanuel prayer process or even the journaling process, there is creativity being released. Yeah. We actually have what we call a mercy arts ministry at our church.
Wow.
And so many people who probably more in their 50s and 60s who knew they were artists as young people, but had to lay it down because they had to make a living, right?
Right.
And they had no hope of how they could do that with art. And now years later, discovering, wait a minute, the Lord's speaking to me about who I truly am.
Right.
And and there's so much healing going on even as they just begin to step back into a little bit of creativity, no matter what medium it might be. And then the other piece of the Immanuel art journaling, what we're finding is that, like our friend who is teaching this, she'll just say, just pay attention to what the Lord's saying to you over a month, and then begin to look for images that will memorialize and help you remember what the Lord's done. So she'll create like a 12 by 12 page, and it can be words and images. It doesn't have to be art. It could just be magazine images. The whole point is just create a visual memory of how the Lord has brought healing into your life. And then to be able, so, you can do that certainly in a journal with words, but how much more powerful with visual to just be able to look at those pages again, as we're taught in Life Model, is to really remember.
Right.
Yeah, actually one of the side benefits of what we've learned, both with the art and in general with this whole model, is the power of lifting your whole life with joyful appreciation memories. And so what we found more and more is that the more you catalog and amplify, all human beings are natural amplifiers. And so what we amplify, we become. And so most of us in our culture amplify all the bad stuff. The news amplifies the bad stuff. So appreciation has become a huge value, and is a big part of this model, is the power of going back to a memory where there was something good that happened and revisit it and amplify it in the present and look for Jesus there. And then it becomes a golden memory that God can do more and more from. It's almost like a secret place inside of you that you've discovered. And the more you do that, it lifts your whole identity up and says, oh, my life isn't maybe so bad after all. I was all focused on all the bad things, the trauma things, but instead I'm discovering all the good things. And then when that's shared, and that's when it's shared with either one individual or in a group, then what happens is we found, as people are listening to it, then we can say, hey, now did anybody else identify with what just this person just shared about their joyful encounter with God? And then it multiplies out throughout the room, and it's very, very powerful to do it in group settings too.
We like to call that Immanuel Church.
There you go. Yeah. That sounds like church to me.
When you were sharing that, it reminded me when we do group Immanuels in most of the contexts, whether it's a class or a seminar. And one of the things I love to do with people is ask them to remember their moment of salvation. And people can tell their testimony, and it's, they usually have, if they've worked at it. And then, but what we'll do is we'll say, okay, just just remember the details of that and step back into that moment and begin to just pay attention. Where were you? Were there other people there? What time of year was it? What time of the day was it? So we're helping them with the connection piece, the right brain thing.
Yep.
Or can you remember what your body felt like? Just remember the details of that moment and just begin to thank Jesus for the details of it, and then tell him what you appreciate about him. And now, why don't you ask to perceive him in that moment? Now, obviously, you're asking Jesus into your life, so he was there.
Exactly.
But why don't you just look for him in that moment? And it's such a dramatic experience for people because it's such a different thing to tell your salvation story than to step back into it, relive it, look for Jesus in it, and go, oh my gosh, he was there. I see him. And pay attention. What's the expression on his face? What does it feel like to notice him there with you? And now ask him, is there anything else he wants you to know about that moment in your life? And what we find is that the Lord speaks all kinds of destiny that they never even thought of when they tell their testimony, their salvation testimony. And it's such a beautiful thing. So it's amplifying this amazing turning point in people's lives where they've said yes to Jesus, but he has so much more for them in that moment. It's one of those moments. We're going to collect that moment, not just as a memorial on a timeline of our life, but we're going to say, Lord, what more do you have for me in that moment? It's just such a beautiful experience for people.
I think what you're saying is let's savor.
That's
Absolutely.
right.
Let's savor that moment. Because in our society of scroll past, scroll past, scroll past, scroll past, scroll past, it's kind of boom, 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 boom. And we don't take time to savor and really taste and see and experience that moment. Even something as profound as a salvation experience, when you were baptized, when you had a profound encounter with Jesus, that it may have been the one-off thing, and then you move on. But to choose to come back and sit in the moment and to savor the moment and to experience it, a lot of people miss that.
They do.
But yet, how significant to actually experience it and feel it and connect in a sensory way.
That's right.
To that experience, because then it becomes a more holistic. It's not just the information that just happened here, but I'm encountering and savoring. All of my senses are awakened to what happened in that moment. That is a profundity that we miss so often in our society because we're so quick to scroll past.
That's right.
That's a great example. Instagram, perfect example.
Well, certainly. Yes, so
one of the things that has been delightful for us in this process is all the applications of the Immanuel Approach. So, of course, Immanuel journaling and Immanuel healing prayer, but we've also, and this isn't new, I'm sure there's many other people doing this, but we've done Immanuel Bible meditation, so people can take a passage of Scripture. It's almost similar to Lectio, if you're familiar with that, where the Holy Spirit highlights something, but then we do a journaling process of, so Jesus, what more do you have to say to me about this? There's that, and we've done, Immanuel evangelism. And he's doing Immanuel business coaching, which is also not, there are others doing the same thing.
That sounds pretty awesome right there.
It is. Yeah. And one of the things that that came to mind is we're not marriage counselors, we're pastoral, but people come to us and we learned very quickly that we probably shouldn't step into trying to counsel marriages, especially ones that are in major crises. But what we have found is that if we can take a couple through the Immanuel connection process, it's a way to build joy, to help them remember that they've had joyful times together. Because in the present moment, with lots of pain and crises going on, they can't remember what that felt like. And so if you listen to Jim Wilder talk about marriage and Chris Corsi, they'll say, well, when you fell in love, you were really falling into joy. And then when you get married, you forget that you have to keep building joy. So when we do Immanuel prayer with couples, we ask them each to remember a joyful memory that they had together. So they're both remembering different memories. And then we have them take turns connecting with that memory and finding Jesus in it. So they're deepening the connection, remembering the joy, the whatever it was. And the other one's they're going with them in that memory. They're silent, but the other one's having this experience. And I remember on the beach in Hawaii, or whatever it might have been, and Jesus. And so, Jesus, what do you want me to know about my marriage? So the other one's observing this, and we give them a few minutes to do that, and then we switch to the other person. Now, share us what was your memory, your joyful memory. So what we're finding, it doesn't solve all the issues, but they're rebuilding joy capacity in their marriage. And they're being reminded, oh, we have had joy together, and we want that back. And then we will refer them to marriage counselors who can help them deal with more of the issues. But we feel like we have a piece to bring to marriages that doesn't always happen in marriage counseling, because it is often focused on the issues and the pain.
Yeah.
And so that's been kind of an amazing...
and core to all marriages is the core level of attachment.
Yeah.
And so every time you're amplifying that attachment place, you're deepening, you're lifting, kind of like we talked about, like with the artist, like you're lifting their identity, but in this case you're lifting their marriage identity, their couple identity, and you're like giving them hope again, especially if they've lost hope. It's lifting them. Oh, yes, I remember. In fact, I did an Immanuel with a man who'd been divorced for about 8 years, and they'd had major conflict because they had 5 children, and they were still having terrible conflict. And he had an experience with Jesus in his Immanuel where Jesus, he was sitting on a beach, and he asked Jesus in this memory healing process. He asked Jesus, what do you want to say to me about my marriage? And he said, well, let's talk about how much you love
your ex-wife.
I'll say Sue. So how much do you love Sue? And he said, I don't love Sue. You better start. And so Jesus brought back memory after memory after memory about how they were first falling in love, and before she had an affair, and all this joyful stuff. And then he turned and said, so now tell me how much you love Sue. And he said, well, I still need help. And then he had more memories. And to make a long story short, it broke the pain between them. The next time they saw each other, that one word exchange of forgiveness or anything, it changed the atmosphere of their marriage, their relationship. They were divorced, and she was actually remarried. But it changed it without even any words spoken, because the heart was changed, and the memory of the relationship was changed, and the value of the person was restored out of remembering that good connection. So it's very, very powerful.
It's like it's reframing things. It's totally reframing things. And bringing a positive into that. Because I've heard that true healing can be measured by whether or not the memory is causing pain. And if it's not hurting anymore, then that is the sign that true healing has come. And there's not a re-injury or a re-traumatizing when you come up against that memory. So what a beautiful thing for marriages. Good on you guys for doing that. That's awesome.
We know we're not the only ones. We know Carl has done, but this just we sort of fell into it. It was a wonderful discovery. We're like, well, let's try this and see what happens.
Well, and you're adding your unique personality and your unique identity to the larger puzzle of what God's doing in the earth to help bring us all to healing.
I had a wonderful experience of leading someone to the Lord this way on an airplane flight. Sitting next to this girl, she's a surfer from San Diego, and she's coming back from a trip with her parents, and she's coming back trying to decide whether she's going to go see her boyfriend that she'd been dating for 9 months or something. And she was telling me she began to discover he was probably an alcoholic, and then he got diagnosed with cancer. So she felt like she was bound, like, I got to take care of him because he's got cancer, but I really wanted to get rid of him because he's an alcoholic. So she was like she was really torn up. So I'm sitting there, okay, well, I was surprised that she was sharing that much with me. She had already known that I was a Christian and a pastor, even, because she asked me what I did. And so then I just said, well, I do some kind of prayer counseling that maybe could help. Would you want to do that? Now, I knew she wasn't a Christian. And she said, well, yeah, I'm open. So I said, okay, you remember a time when you felt like something supernatural happened to you? So she gets quiet, and then she says, well, my girlfriend and I were down on this professional surf trip in South America, and we were out partying, and we both got drunk, but she got really drunk, and she stumbled out of the nightclub, and I lost her in this city down in South America, and I couldn't find her. I looked for over an hour trying to find her, freaking out. Finally go back to the hostel that we were staying in, like, what am I going to do? And then this couple come walking in carrying her. And we had met this couple in another city at another hostel, and they had recognized her, found her passed out on the street. And I knew when they walked in that must be a miracle. I don't believe in God, but that must be a miracle.
Wow.
So I said, wow, okay, so if you thought that might be a miracle, let me just pray something. I said, Holy Spirit, would you just show where Jesus was in that moment? She gets quiet, and she looks at me with these big, bright eyes like, oh my gosh, I see Jesus. It was Jesus that helped them find her.
Wow.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's amazing. So then I say, well, would you want to ask that Jesus into your heart right now? And she said, yeah, I do. So she asked Jesus into her heart just like that on the plane. Well, so then I said, well, now you've been struggling as to what you're supposed to do, because she was actually we're going to land in Orange County. She's going to take this car, and she was trying to decide whether she's going to her house or to her boyfriend's house. But she just was really torn about it. So I said, well, why don't you ask the Jesus that you just asked into your heart, what should I do? So she gets quiet, and then she looks up and says, well, he said, just go home, that he could take care of my boyfriend. And then when she said it, I realized, do you realize that the Holy Spirit just helped you go to a memory where your girlfriend, because of alcohol, could have died, in order to give you the resource and the revelation that Jesus could help with that, and you could trust now with his boyfriend, who's facing alcohol and almost death because of the cancer. So it was like a beautiful thing that he could do by simply face-to-face with Jesus, exactly what you guys are all about, like helping someone who doesn't even know Jesus have a face-to-face encounter in the midst of pain. Wow.
That's awesome. What a beautiful testimony. What a beautiful testimony. And I think we'll probably just wrap with that, but I love, that's just one tiny story in the myriad of lives that have been completely transformed by the presence of Jesus and by coming face to face with Jesus. And that's just a beautiful story. Thank you so much for sharing with us, for joining us, for giving us of your time, and for sharing what you're doing and what your unique contribution into this inner healing thing is. And I just pray blessing on everything that you guys are doing in SoCal, and just keep on keeping on.
It was our privilege.
It's wonderful
to be here with you.
Thanks for asking us. Wow.
Awesome. Absolutely. Thank you.
One thing that stuck out to me about this couple was their tender hearts. I'm not saying that our other interviewees didn't have tender hearts, but there's some people that just have more of a father heart, mother heart of God, and that's kind of their calling and anointing. And I don't know if they would call themselves that, but that's really what stuck out to me with this couple. And I just felt a real, like a tender
peaceful,
warmth.
Very peaceful.
And and I feel like that is so indicative of what they do, what they practice, which is really not just here, I'm going to do the Immanuel Approach prayer on you, but we're going to practice Immanuel lifestyle. And as they talked, it can, well, it should. I mean, Immanuel's always with us, but how do we actually apply that to everyday life and to helping people practically and to helping ourselves? And what does that look like in conversation and in work? And I love what they're doing and making it more of a holistic approach, making Immanuel apply holistically, if we can put it that way.
Right. Well, he was talking about how there were other main models being used in the church, but then incorporating the brain science of what happens when you have that positive memory, you amplify it, you express appreciation, you amplify the appreciation, you savor that, and what it does to you neurologically. I'm thinking that all of the inner healing models can benefit from that, because the whole point is to have that intimate connection, that interactive connection with Jesus. So I love that they're doing that, and they're seeing that bringing unity in the different models that they are using within their own church community, and being able to have an opportunity to just really use that as a landing pad or a place to launch, or both, and how effective that is.
Immanuel and creativity. This is right up my alley. I'm not an artist, like a pen or paintbrush artist, but other creative means, theater and film and expressing yourself creatively. I love thinking about how we could apply Immanuel, keeping in mind that Immanuel gave us the creativity. If you're an artist, the reason that you have a gift is because God gave you the gift. Whether you're a believer or not, it doesn't matter. God gave you the gift of the art form or the creativity that you have, and he gave all of us creativity. And if we tap in, and I'm sure so many Christian artists do tap into the creativity that God gave us, and then Holy Spirit, really, I just see it like it's creating with the Holy Spirit.
Yes.
It's really allowing the Holy Spirit or Jesus to guide us as we do whatever creative art form that we're doing. And then, of course, bringing healing to us in that, because when we connect with him, there is healing always. So even doing our art form, doing our creativity, we can experience healing because we're experiencing the presence of Immanuel, and wherever he is, there is healing, there is life, there is freedom.
I don't know if our listeners know that we actually run weekend retreats for ladies at the moment. We're thinking about how that might look for men and women in the future. But one of the things that we do have incorporated into these inner healing, heart healing weekends, called Dash Away Weekends, is a creative component called the Art of Transformation. And one of our team members, Deanne Sweeney, leads that. She's from Conroe, Texas. And it is a beautiful, interactive, hands-on group inner healing activity using art. And using that left brain, right brain, bilateral encounter, connection, unlocking of things that are going on inside through an art exercise. And so there is a lot of value to that, because the creative brain is the interactive brain. It's the brain that speaks the language of the heart. It's where we have encounter with Jesus, and being able to activate that and being able to use that to unlock us, get us more relational, get us unlocked and more able to connect with Jesus. It's a powerful tool. It's a super powerful tool. I love also that they are using the Immanuel approach in marriage counseling. Who would have thought that if you are having trouble in your marriage, focusing on what you don't like about the other person might not be helpful?
Well, that's right. And in previous episodes, we have heard, it was either Carl Lehman or Jim Wilder saying that our brains bond with whoever we focus our appreciation on.
Right.
Wow. That really plugs back into that. It's when I am having an argument with somebody or tension, if I purposefully, it's not always easy, intentionally think about things that I appreciate about the person. And you and I, Kathy, have tried this. We've actually, this is proven and tested.
It's proven and tested by your co-hosts.
And I just don't even want to see you right now. Oh my gosh. And I start thinking about, and it's going to take a little bit of discipline at first, of what I appreciate about the other person. I start realizing that my brain is changing, and I start releasing the endorphins and the dopamine, and because I am practicing appreciation, as we've talked about in previous episodes, what that does for us, what that does for our brain. And God knew that because, again, our brains bond with whoever we point appreciation toward. And of course, countless scriptures about giving thanks to the Lord.
Right.
Why? Because it was a neurological, biological, physiological bonding of our brain to him, not just a spiritual exercise.
Absolutely. I'm so glad we got this interview, and I'm so glad that we were introduced to Kent and Cathy and that they capped off our day of interviews at the Transform Conference. And all of these past 5 or so interviews that we've done, if you want more information about what these guys are doing, Life Model Works is where you're going to go because the life model works. Yep. Little play there. And Deeper Walk International, Journey Groups. And, you know, I'm really glad that we got these earlier on in our series. We've got probably 15 to 20 more interviews that we're going to do. We're going to interview directors of other healing models, and we're going to be continuing to roll out content. But there's something really special about the Immanuel Approach and the brain science component to all of this. I think if our listeners catch on to the whole brain science component of this and understanding how the brain works, and other people who are involved as practitioners in other healing models, if you can tap into what these guys are talking about and incorporate that into what you're doing, man, it's a game changer, because it's going to help make your job easier when people come and you can help them get connected to Jesus right at the start.
Yeah, I don't feel like it's just an addition. This is just me, Melinda, my opinion, but I feel like it's not just an addition. I feel like it's a foundation.
Right.
That it's not just, oh, let's add some nice trim on the house and that's a nice paint color. But this is actually, for me personally, using it as a foundation, not only the Immanuel Approach, but all the brain science behind it. Because I personally have been so affected by it and have witnessed how it changes lives. When we understand how God made our brain and how the neuroplasticity, I mean, this is Caroline Leaf as well. I mean, this is a big thing because we can change our brain. We can change our neural pathways. And it's incredible. I've just loved God more through it, that He created our brains to be able to change, and that old dogs can learn new tricks.
Yes.
We can change our brains and the ways of those automatic responses, negative automatic responses that have been there for years and years and years can change. And I am in awe and wonder at the creativity of God and how brain science is just merely backing up the Bible now.
We have an amazingly brilliant creator, don't we?
Yes, we do.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for listening. And I'll tell you, we're finishing up with the Life Model Works, folks, but we've got some amazing new content coming next week. We're going to be introducing you to some other internationally known leaders and directors of other ministries that are about helping you connect face-to-face to Jesus and get healing in your heart. We're excited about that. We're actually hitting the road here to catch more interviews next week, and we're just going to keep rolling it out. We still have content we haven't touched yet. So we are excited to get the information out to you guys. And we're so thankful that you have been with us on the journey. We are continuing to increase our download stats. And so we know people are listening. Thank you so much.
Yep. And continue to share.
Yes.
Share.
Subscribe.
And I don't mean Sonny and share. Share the podcast, baby.
Yes.
Share it.
Please subscribe. Give us a rating and write a brief review. It really does help with our visibility through the podcast pool. It helps us to be more visible. And we are appreciating, we've had a couple of emails this week just affirming and encouraging us. And so thank you for listening. Thank you for reaching out. We'd love to hear from you if you have any questions or comments, anything, just to let us know that you're there. You can find us on Facebook, face2faceministries.org. You can find us on Instagram
at face2facemin.
Yes.
Or you can look at our website, face2faceministries.org, and check out all that we're doing. Sign up for our monthly newsletter.
Yes.
Find out what's going on in our world. And if you feel so inclined, we would appreciate any gift of any amount toward our podcast. We would greatly appreciate that. We thank you for listening. Thank you for being a part.
Yes.
You're the reason that we're doing this.
Yes, you are. And if you need any more information about how to give, you can go to face2faceministries.org/give. And there's information, several ways to give and partner with us, including shopping at Amazon on Amazon Smile. So thanks for listening. And we're excited to introduce you to some new folks very soon.
keep you on the edge of your seat.
Yes.
Y'all. It's going to be good.
Gonna be great.
We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.